All right, let's walk through a sample essay for the question 2 prose analysis. This essay was a student essay on a previous AP exam for the prompt about how the narrator reveals the character of McTeague, looking really at the narrator's attitude toward the characterization. So take a moment, you can hit pause and read through this sample essay. All right, let's take a look at the organization of this essay first. You'll notice right here I have a little key for the colors that I've highlighted, the different aspects of organization. So take a look first at this thesis. This thesis really makes an argument for the narrator's attitude, which is the pity, and it also helps you to see how McTeague is characterized with the juxtaposition of his strength and stupidity. So the thesis is able to tackle both parts of what the prompt was asking the students to do. The second sentence here is a preview, so it just highlights the types of literary elements that are being used. Try to avoid a list of literary elements here, but make sure you're explaining the effect and the purpose of some of the literary elements, like the details of his professional failure, explain the reason for the pity. The syntax furthers the juxtaposition, so their preview not only gives you an idea of the elements they're going to focus on, but it tells you a little bit about the effects that those elements have. Now, moving on, we see in the first paragraph a claim about the pity that the narrator has. So they start out very simple, very basic and straightforward, but you'll see that each paragraph builds on this claim. This last sentence is a nice tie to the thesis. They kind of sum up that idea of his strength versus his stupidity and really tie that example back to why the narrator is pitying McTeague. This second paragraph does a nice transition to add to the argument. They really are able to explore the causes of the narrator's attitude, the roots of that pity, by looking at the fact that McTeague is ignorant of his failure. So this transition is really linking that pity attitude to the actual reason why the narrator is pitying him, which has to do with his characterization, his internal mindset that he's ignorant, but then also his external aspects of his failure in his job. This paragraph got a little lengthy, so it looks like they did a nice transition in between to link some of the different details that they were highlighting. So this sentence right here transitions you from the details of his workplace to the details of McTeague's own point of view, that he doesn't realize his shortcomings. And then the last sentence again ties back to that thesis. It just wraps it up really nicely and helps you to see how it all relates back to the main argument. The last paragraph has a nice transition to build on the contrast. It shows the result of his ignorance. So they're building on that contrast that they first identified in the first paragraph, and then also showing you a bit about McTeague, that making that claim that he is really inept. He's not capable of doing much. At the end of the paragraph, again, another tie back to the thesis. It's really a nice summary sentence, and you'll notice that this essay doesn't have a conclusion. I think that this sentence right here wraps it all up nicely. It sums up the main ideas, the main literary elements that help create that effect of pity for McTeague. So you notice that the organization, it builds. We see the basic claim of pity, but then we also see some of the reasons for that pity in the characterization of McTeague. One thing to also note is that the intro is super short. There's no attention getter or anything like that. It's okay to just jump right into your argument and focus on that thesis that you want to use to drive your whole essay. All right, so now that we've looked at organization, let's look at the breakdown of the analysis versus evidence. Here's my key up here. The yellow is all of the analytical statements. And remember, analysis is going to be anything that pertains to their inferences about the narrator's attitude or about the characterization of McTeague. The evidence is all in green, and you're going to see a mix of paraphrased evidence, summarized evidence, and direct quotes. So something to consider when you are writing of when do you choose to paraphrase versus use a direct quote. You'll also notice that I bolded and underlined literary elements / patterns that they identified, and then bolded and italicized analysis verbs. You have a nice long list of analysis verbs in that packet. Those would be really helpful to start using to make sure that you are actually making an analytical statement, not just summing up what's going on in the passage. All right, so let's take a look at what their analysis looks like. We see, again, the basis of the argument is focusing on his pity and his characterization of that balance of his strength and stupidity. In the first paragraph, one thing to note is that they picked up on a pattern. So they didn't organize this paragraph by a specific literary element, but really by a pattern that they started to see develop of all of the details and all of the word choices that kind of weighed his strength versus his intellect. Notice that this literary element of diction is really important in the first part. They listed some word choices, but really chose those to show how McTeague is described. Sometimes I think it can be easy to pull out all these cool word choices and try to clump them together, but you want to make sure you're using them purposely to prove an effect. So here they're proving the effect that the author is building McTeague up to be larger than life. So a little bit of characterization there. This second part, we see more word choices to really show the other side, not just his positives of his strength, but the negatives of his mind. So we see, again, word choices are chosen specifically to relate to that and clumped together to connote uselessness and weakness. So they saw that pattern develop in those word choices. Moving on to the second paragraph. This one, they chose to kind of broaden the literary element. So they're looking at selection of detail overall. But as I mentioned before, this paragraph does a nice job of giving all of the details of the types of clients he has, how McTeague feels, and then a little bit about what his office looks like. And they balance that off with some of the evidence that really shows McTeague's ambition and his own point of view toward his life. So again, not just limiting to one literary element, but trying to combine literary elements to really prove a point about that character. One thing that's important to note in this paragraph is that they drew on some prior knowledge, some context that we don't get in the passage. And like I've mentioned before, you pull out your prior knowledge of what you already know about the topic, because sometimes that could help you draw some good inferences and see the contrast of what's expected versus what we're shown. Like, we do not want to go to a dentist's office that smells like bedding, creosote, and ether. That's just not right. So right here, I liked how this author decided to focus on that contrast of what we usually know about a dentist office is that it's sterile, has that clean fragrance going on in the office. You'll see too that this paragraph uses a lot of different analytical verbs. The idea, the contrast that furthers his lack of success. The evidence suggests that he is stupidly happy. The narrator adopts a tone of pity. So really using a variety of analytical verbs to make sure you're making some of those inferences. Now, the last paragraph. This paragraph is what really wowed the readers on the AP exam. So I'll share with you their comments in a moment here. But take a look at what really this paragraph focused on was the syntax. So the evidence is we see all of the positives kind of read out like a list to add much grandeur to his strength is their analytical statement toward that. And then they picked out that actually the lines that follow that reverse the positive effect by being constructed with great simplicity. Detail upon details are simply piled on top of one another. No fancy lead-ins, no unnecessary devices. So this is a really thoughtful piece of evidence, paraphrased, to show some of the contrasts. This little section right here is jam-packed with analytical inferences. We're seeing that all of those details force us to pity him, understand why the narrator has that attitude toward the dentist, is this idea that he is an endless balance sheet of unfavorable items that outweigh what potential may exist. That's really the basis of the whole passage, and this student was able to pinpoint that so eloquently. Also, they picked out the irony in the use of the syntax, a modest affair, almost kind of picking out some of the sarcasm of the narrator here in order to add to that last analytical statement about why he's pitying McTeague, that he has this stupid contentment. He doesn't even know what else he could possibly do with his life. So hopefully these kind of color coding is able to help you see what the analysis looks like and how all the different ways that you can kind of pull together different literary elements and talk about their effects. All right, I'll leave you with this little snippet. This is all the comments that the AP readers gave this essay. You're going to see an amazing score that this essay received. It's the top of the top. And really, it comes down to they were able to get through that whole passage, show you from start to end how the narrator developed his character. They did so in a sophisticated way. Their sentence structures, their word choices were just really amazing that they were able to do this in such a short amount of time. And then also the way that they're able to analyze the evidence, pull it all together, pick out a lot of different literary elements and pair them up to show some of those main effects. That's why it got such a great score. So hit pause, read these comments, and think about what you might need to work on in terms of your organization and or analysis.